For those that do not know me, probably the vast majority of your listeners, Dom Grande. I am a corporate securities attorney at Frederickson and Byron here in town, full service law firm. I work primarily with high growth startup companies that are raising capital, venture capital firms as well. So on both sides, essentially securities transactions and general corporate work. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here today, because there's a strong intersection between securities laws and securities compliance and the blockchain industry. And as we'll see, just to preview, there's a lot of confusion out there, and for good reason. For good reason. The fundamental characteristic of the regulatory environment over the past 15 years has been zero clarity. Right. So that makes things, makes it difficult to operate. And I think this is a timely topic. Again, I'm sure this isn't the first time this topic has come up, in particular in connection with the conversations you've been having. And there's a lot of content out there at all the various conferences. But again, I think it's still timely because for the first time in the past 15 years, we have reason to believe that we might see some real substantive progress in this area. Yeah. And just as we're tracking what is going to happen over the coming months, the coming years, I think it would be really helpful to unpack this issue generally. I mean, what is a security? What are we even talking about? Why does the SEC, why have they tended to believe that they have jurisdiction over essentially the entire space? Does that make sense? Where does the CFTC come into play? And again, just take a general inventory of where we are, how we got there, and we're going from here.
Yeah, I think keeping it real high level too, though, is so important, or you lose people. Yeah. Right. Like if you get into the weeds too much, like if I had someone on here who did technical analysis when it came to which by the way, I think is a weird term. Why do they call it technical analysis?
To be honest, it's witchcraft to me.
Well, that term could be used for anything.
Yes.
Like there's no, it's kind of like the term general contractor. Yeah. Like we all know it means construction, but general contractor could be for any, that doesn't specify construction at all. Anyway, technical analysis doesn't specify reading price charts at all, but that's how we know it. So I'll call it chart reading. But if I have someone in here who does that, then people are going to get lost in the terminology and the lingo. And same if I had someone on here who coded and they were speaking about whatever, Java or something. So when it comes to this topic of securities, and I'm sure you've watched enough videos and you took classes, you've taught clients, you've probably had to educate startups. Like, look, what you're selling here is a security. Absolutely. And they're probably like, a what? I know, I just want to share a piece of my business. You're like, yeah, that's a security. So this falls under these rules and da-da-da-da. Is that kind of how you have to walk new entrepreneurs through this? Well, absolutely. It's not intuitive necessarily. I mean, there's no particular reason why just the everyday layperson would know the legal definition of security. Yeah. So I think it's important to spend, a couple minutes just unpacking that. Sure. Well, let me take a stab at it. So a security, because if I can get it, then anyone can. Yeah. And okay, so a security is when I sell something that expects if the company does well, it would go up in value. So it's an investment. That is an asset or a piece of the company. Yes. And that's a great example. I think there's a broader category, and that's where crypto comes into play, and why the SEC has made an argument that perhaps some or all crypto tokens out there are securities. I mean, just generally speaking, and what you said is exactly correct. And just generalizing it a little bit more, anytime that you're making an outlay of capital, either to a person, individual, or group, and you expect to get paid back, and it doesn't really matter necessarily what that arrangement looks like, but if those general characteristics apply, and getting paid back depends on the group you give the money to performing well and using your money wisely, generally speaking, that's in the most broad terms possible, a security. Yeah. So actually, while I'm all about crypto and these projects, these platforms being able to build freely, I still don't know how they're not considered securities. And I know I'm supposed to be on the other side. I know I'm supposed to browbeat people who say online that it's a security. And it's like, no, it's not. Hello. Ripple is not a security, or XRP or whatever.
Yep.
Haha, it's not a security. We won. And I'm thinking, well, did Logic win? Because to me, it sure seems like a security. And I think, to me, ETH is a security by that definition. Now, again, if I say that, that's like they're not going to like that. Like, no, it's not. Hello.
Right.
We've settled this. It's not, because that opens up the door to all kinds of freedom by it not being a security. I get it. I get the political reason why I should say it's not a security. But the reasonable part of me says, no, when Vitalik sold ETH for very little to Galaxy or Novgorod or whatever that dude's name was, for $1 or a dime in ETH, the expectation was that ETH was going to go up in value and they were going to make a mountain of money. Yeah. And they've made a mountain range of money.
Right.
So now tell me where I'm wrong, or what loophole crypto found to win, or if it's just simply a matter of not having the old guard in there anymore and the new guard is going to let it slide, even though it technically by logic does look like a security.
Right. Well, first of all, I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of that. The reality of the situation is, unless or until we get regulations or a statute that is catered specifically towards crypto, it's unclear. It's going to be fact specific. And so I think you need to take each, pursuant to current law, you have to take a look at every project individually and analyze all of the different aspects of it, which again is cumbersome. And again, skipping ahead, that's why there's a strong need for additional clarity. But with all that in mind, I mean, here's some facts that we can use to benchmark the analysis.
I'm sorry. Let me say one more thing. I'm not pro government putting their boot on crypto and Bitcoin, because that was a lot of Bitcoin Maxi's position. Like, well, the SEC should be stomping on the throats of these other projects. I'm not that way at all.
Oh, understood.
What I think should, if we were just being totally reasonable, what I think should happen is you should redefine security in the age of crypto, so that those old rules don't apply to this new technology that is completely outside of the box from the world, the analog world we lived in when the security regulations were created. Mm-hmm. So it is a security, but we should treat this security differently. That's what I would think. But I suppose they don't want to make new regulations. So what they'd rather do is just sort of let crypto slide instead of, so it's like they move the goalpost instead of I don't know, make a new framework, which is more work. But anyway, I'll let you keep going. Sorry.
No, that's right. And there is a need for a new framework, but unless or until that happens, just by the nature of it, we're dealing with the old framework. And under that, it is a fact and circumstances based analysis. But the thing is, I mean, there are a couple different ways to look at it. So let's take Bitcoin just briefly.
Yep.
That is one of the few instances where the SEC did actually come out and provide a little guidance.
Yeah.
And they said, we don't think this is a security. Yeah. Well, why? Because the answer to that question could help analyze things like Ethereum and other types of crypto. Well, it came down to the fact that, I mean, usually if there's a security, there's what's called an issuer, somebody that's actually selling you the security. That doesn't apply to Bitcoin, right? There's not the CEO of Bitcoin. Right. Bitcoin doesn't have a board of directors.
Yep.
I mean, so who do you go to?
Yep.
I mean, if you purport to say there's all these compliance obligations, who's going to comply, right? So that's an important distinction. I think on the very other end of the spectrum, but then we can get to Ethereum, because in my opinion, it's somewhere in the middle. Hey, you remember the ICOs in 2017 and after? In my opinion, based on current law, that is an egregious example of issuing unregistered securities.
Yeah.
And here's the reason why I have that opinion. I mean, if you look at what they were doing, they were issuing these tokens, selling it for cash. They had no utility. They didn't do anything, right? And the whole idea behind selling these tokens for cash that were newly created tokens was to raise cash to take certain actions that they hope would, at a later date, create some value for the tokens. Well, that looks an awful lot like initial
equity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The mechanism's different.
But it's not equity.
Yeah, it's not equity. It's not equity because you're still not promised a stake of profits. And frankly, there's still an argument you could make to try to carve that out of the definition of security And I mean, the point of this entire discussion is that it is not an objective analysis, and that's the problem, right? But again, under current law, I mean, I think you can make an argument either way, but I think it's very strong that in that case, those tokens were securities.
Well, Ethereum had an ICO.
Right.
So how is it that they came to the conclusion that Ethereum, by the definition of security today, was not a security? Yeah,
it's a great question. And at the end of the day, I mean, the legal definition of security, Congress back in the 30s, they passed the Securities Act. They told you what a security is. They listed it out: stocks, bonds, loans, but they included a catch-all investment contract. And that's really what this entire analysis is about, because they don't say Ethereum in the act, right? They don't say Bitcoin. They don't say cryptocurrencies. Of course, how could they have? So the only reason we're having this conversation is because of that last catch-all investment contract.
Okay.
And that was essentially defined pursuant to characteristics that we've been discussing, right? It's investment of money in a common enterprise with the expectation of profits based on the efforts of others. That's the exact test, which again is essentially paraphrasing what you described, what I've been describing, right? It's where you're giving money and you expect a return.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what the analysis is about. And with Ethereum, I mean, it is interesting. The SEC did at least have some indications that they did not think Ethereum was a security, at least when it was under a proof of work consensus mechanism. And there were indications that they might be changing their mind under proof of stake. So it's complicated, but I think the whole idea came down to common enterprise, right? Okay. Is there a common enterprise? Bitcoin, pretty clear there isn't, right? Ethereum, is there? And frankly, I agree with where you're going with it. You can make an argument that there is. You know, at least there's the Ethereum Foundation. But I mean, again, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. Is there an issuer?
Well, right? Yeah, and there was.
And there was, wasn't there?
Well, well, okay, so, but, you know, Ripple won, right? So they were found that XRP was not a security. What was the logic behind it not being a security?
That's a very interesting one, because to be honest, the ruling came out in a way that I think was unexpected amongst a lot of us in the legal community. We believed that there would be some kind of a ruling based on the common enterprise element, right? That they would try to argue that the Ripple organization isn't necessarily critical, that XRP is sufficiently decentralized. They didn't even go there. And in the scope of the decision,
the defense didn't go there.
Yeah. Well, at least the court ruling themselves. I mean, the defense, they argued for everything under the sun, right?
Okay.
And then, but it comes down to, in terms of any precedential value, what did the court say and what did they think? And that actually came down to the last two prongs of the test, that there wasn't an expectation of profits from the efforts of others, which is a little strange if you think about it.
It's just false, right?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The court didn't think it was false, and here's why, right? I mean, I had the same reaction, right? There's people, they're buying XRP, they want a return. Whether there's a return, isn't that based on?
I remember buying XRP in 2018.
Yeah.
And you're darn right I expected it to go up.
Yes.
I mean, that's why else would I have it?
Well, exactly. But what they did, for better or worse.
These weren't stable coins.
Right. They're not stable
coins. This was the hope of seeing number go up, because it had gone up and I was caught up in it at the time. I remember that very clearly.
For sure. But, you know, and again,
maybe I don't speak for the original investors. Well, clearly I don't, because I wasn't one.
Yeah.
But maybe they would say, well, that's you. You know, you're a degen day trader at the time. We're not. We're proper. I don't know if the investors, but I don't know how they could ever say that it wasn't a security.
Well, that's the thing. They made a distinction. They didn't say that it's never a security.
Okay.
They did say that under certain circumstances. So, for instance, when they sold XRP to professional investors pursuant to an investment contract, that they said was a security.
Okay.
Because the terms of the contract were pretty clear that obviously they purchased it for an expectation of profits based on what they were going to do.
Yeah.
They drew a line unexpectedly with secondary sales. So if you or I were to purchase XRP on an exchange, and the argument went something like this, saying, well, I mean, if you buy on an exchange, there's no way to know whether you're actually buying them from Ripple, who would otherwise be the issuer.
Okay.
So somehow that changes the analysis.
But why weren't they still culpable for the original sale?
Well, I mean, as far as I can tell, and by the way, I think the case went on beyond the point where I started to follow it. So this might be a year old, just a qualifier. The last I saw, the court did say that, again, they issued unregistered securities.
Oh, okay.
But what I highly suspect is that they found an exemption as a private offering, because that's the name of the game too. And we don't need to go into excruciating detail on what that means, public versus private. But I assume that under those circumstances, all I can tell you is that it is perfectly possible to legally sell securities to professional investors without going public. You can do that. And that's what I assume they did. But again, honestly.
So it's not a unregistered security if it's private.
Well, it is an unregistered security technically, but it's not illegal.
Oh.
Would be the distinction, because registration essentially means going public. Oh. That's what registration means. Like, we've registered with the SEC.
Okay. So they were selling securities, but it wasn't against the unregistered securities breach because it wasn't a public offering.
Yeah, it was a private offering. And again, this is speculation. I didn't dig this deeply.
That changes it a little bit.
Yeah. But and that's the thing.
Maybe even a lot. I don't know.
Well, right. But it really is those secondary sales that advocates of the industry are concerned with, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, let's consider a scenario where all of it were considered securities. Frankly, that would destroy a large percentage of the utility.
This is why I didn't think Roe versus Wade was going to get overturned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you didn't see that one coming.
Yeah.
And that's because
tangent.
You can argue so I was really surprised it got overturned, because never mind the reasoning. Mm-hmm. It's about political feasibility, right? And I just didn't think they were going to upset that apple cart.
Yeah.
Even though you could say from the start that ruling was messed up or whatever. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it in writing in black and white, you could say, oh yeah, that ruling never should have happened. Like, it's always been a state's issue and should have always remained one, but it wasn't. And that's the one that we've just had. And it's just how the rest of it has gone on. It's kind of like how they say the reason, like a big problem with American healthcare is that it's so baked into our workplace. Mm-hmm. And like, that never should have happened. Yeah, true.
Do you know how that came about?
True. Yeah, I do. I do. Because wages were capped.
Yep.
Okay, I get it. I get that in a vacuum, in an ideal situation, we shouldn't have had healthcare attached to our employment as we do today. I get that, but it is.
Right.
And so we have to deal with the situation that we have, and that's how I saw the Roe versus Wade ruling in the 70s. Like, well, maybe it's not ideal that it was taken federal. And, it should have remained a state issue, but they're not going to undo it, even though it maybe arguably should have never been done, because it would just be too politically of a grenade. Yeah, too disruptive. Yeah. But they did overturn it, right?
Right.
And so I thought, I see this similarly, where it's like, it's not so much about what's right and what's wrong. Yeah. It's about what's going to help the country move forward the best. And so let's find a reasoning here that's at least, somewhat we can grip into some language of this ruling, so that there's at least some reason why we can say, no, we just interpreted it differently. Yeah. And you don't sound like a complete crazy person to let the crypto industry go. Yeah. But it just seems like the political winds were going to blow, and eventually we all figured that. And us in the space, we knew eventually things were going to change. It was just a matter of when. Mm-hmm. Again, it just seems like this is about popularity and political momentum more than it is about accurate rulings. Yeah.
Well, I think that's entirely probable. At the end of the day, I think where we're at, the probability, at least as of today, is higher than it's ever been that we will resolve this via new regulations, new rulings, by the SEC and maybe even an act of Congress, which means we could almost all but set aside the Ripple ruling, because when and if there are new regulations, or in particular a statute, then that would in theory supersede the ruling. So I think they'll clean it up a little bit. But I mean, perhaps to your point, about just the whole scenario and how it's political.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick comment on that. I'm curious how you feel about this, but I didn't really see it coming that crypto could or would become even potentially a partisan issue. It seems a little bizarre to me, at least fundamentally, that a new technology should be partisan or political in the slightest. It seems to be going that direction a little bit.
That direction. Actually, it's coming back from that direction. I think it's already climaxed.
Yeah.
And it's maybe coming back, where like you have some DFLers like in our state, Angie Craig is a congresswoman from the South Metro here, and she got money from Stand With Crypto, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she's a pretty prominent progressive.
Yeah.
I mean, she's pretty clear on her beliefs, but she's also from some not so deep blue suburbs, and so she's whatever, maybe more of a moderate. But after all, but anyway, I think maybe there are a rising number of people like her who, and if nothing else, just because of political contributions, they'll change their tune a little bit.
Right.
So I think it is coming back a little bit, but and plus because it's becoming mainstream, like so many people now have Bitcoin, whether they know it or not, right? Because maybe that mutual fund they have bought some of the Bitcoin ETF, right? Isn't that how that kind of works?
Yeah, it can. Yeah.
So a lot of people own Bitcoin. It's just becoming part of everyday life, and once that happens, it kind of mellows out. But I suppose when cryptocurrency was much more experimental and kind of underground. Yeah, maybe there's a cycle here, like kind of like right away it wasn't political.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it kind of, because weren't the cypherpunks kind of a libertarian punk kind of?
Sure. They had a certain philosophy, but at the same time, I don't recall at that point in time. Well, it just wasn't even talked about in the political sphere. I think for a while.
Yeah. So this is why I'm going back and forth with the question, because it seemed like it came out of an ideological, brainchild, and then as it was first being mined and stuff, the people who were into it were like some freedom-oriented people, but a lot of tech people was playing around with mining Bitcoin. Oh, this internet money, that's kind of. And I don't think it was super political then, but I think what helped drive it is what drives a lot of movements when it does have sort of an ideological thing to it.
Yeah.
So like when it's branding in a way, and I don't know. I'm not saying Bitcoin branded itself this way, but certain ideologies connected to it. Like, the same people that want to drink non-pasteurized milk and collect their own rainwater. Now, I don't know, that might confuse listeners, but there's a number of people out there that are mad that they can't drink milk unpasteurized. Like, I don't want to deal with that. I just want to drink it right out of the cow, blah, 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 but that's not allowed. Ron Paul would talk about that, in 2008. And so that group kind of, the ones who weren't into gold, that is, which weren't that many because they're awfully into physical, money.
Right.
It was like that ideology with a modern twist, got into Bitcoin, and you kind of had that continued that libertarian ideal as being money outside of the state. And I guess, in this day and age, when you have one side enjoy something, the other side will then say, well, I don't want to be associated with that if you guys like it.
Yeah.
And so many things have become political.
Right.
Remember this was political too. It was the net neutrality. Remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
Net neutrality.
Yeah,
and that
vaguely.
was that. I don't know if that felt to me similarly as partisan as you see get out the vote campaigns are on their face, not partisan. But when you see all the celebrities and the way they're saying it and the music they're playing when they say it, and the models in their ads and the talent they're using when they're promoting it, it's like, yeah, they're reaching an audience that they want to have vote because they're all going to vote the way they want them to. And so this net neutrality had a similar vibe where all the proponents of it just felt like, oh yeah, this progressives want net neutrality and conservatives don't. And even though, hey, this is not political. Now, I don't know if that's a good example to cryptocurrency, but I'm just saying that even on something as neutral as tech, there are these ideological winds that sway. And when one picks up on it and wants it, so like the idea of net neutrality was, yeah, these greedy corporations like AT&T and T-Mobile and Comcast and whatever, they won't be able to price gouge our data usage. It'll be fair for everyone, like the airwaves on radio or TV and something like that. And the threat was corporations. See? So then it was like the, then it's going to be the business minded, the conservative Republican side that will take the side of the corporate and say, hey, they have to do what they have to do to stay in business, And so then you had that game of political football. With crypto, if these free market, these, Gadsden flag flying people are going to, grab onto Bitcoin, then we don't like that. Like now they want to take their ball and go home. Now they want to not pay taxes. Now they want to, in some cases, skirt rules, get around rules for, reporting their income or even being criminal. So then they attach the whole criminal. Oh, they're using it to buy drugs and this and that. Anyway, that's kind of a long way of saying
it's been a lot of noise.
Yeah,
right. A lot of noise, and I mean we'll see. But the way I look at it is this: I can't say I recall how this played out because I wasn't quite old enough to understand what was going on. But I don't believe that the proliferation of the internet was partisan.
Well, I was actually going to ask you that question. Yeah.
And why would it be?
It's because that's just information. That's like saying the radio is going to be political, which kind of it turned into more of a conservative hotbed than a liberal one. But whatever. That's like saying magazines or.
Well, sure, but
TV is political.
But at the same time, I mean, blockchain, it's a decentralized network of sorts, and it's analogous to the internet in some ways.
Bitcoin being the first crypto out of the gate to say money outside the state is that is an ideological, very attractive to certain ideologies. I'll put it that way.
Yes, I'd agree. At the same time, there are a lot of different other applications that have nothing to do with competing with government issued currency. And I mean that's where it gets interesting.
I think it all comes out in the end, like it all gets settled. Like in time, NFTs got real popular, and who were the main drivers of NFTs? It wasn't the non-pasteurized milk drinkers. It was the artists. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. It was the people who dyed their hair and wear funky clothes. And I went to ETH Denver in 2022, and those were some characters. Right. They're artists. They're dressed fun. They're selling their clothes as an NFT series, and their NFT series were wearing the clothes that they were trying to then sell in real life. They're fashion designers. It was great, but that's a whole different demographic. Right. And I think so as blockchain technology rises, like internet technology, has AI become political?
I haven't noticed yet, right? I mean, maybe it will become political. We'll see. I mean, in my opinion, not to get too off topic, but a lot of general concepts flow through DC these days, it seems, right? So the general default seems to be to regulate something at the highest possible level. And I think if you step back, I mean, put partisan considerations aside entirely, think that's a system that is more prone to emotional disagreement, right? Because
certainly it's who's going to be in control?
Yeah, and because it'll apply to as many people as possible, and
the question of whether it should be controlled, falls along ideological.
Yeah,
like it's typically the progressive who says we need to put some safeguards on this, or it's going to like take over and whatever. That's kind of along the lines of we need to reel in these corporations, or they're going to just mine every mineral out of the earth and cut down every tree. So we need to protect ourselves from the parasitic nature of capitalism. Mm-hmm. So I think there is a progressive call for regulating AI in the same way. But that's even an interesting point, because Elon Musk is maybe not through the government, but then like we need to police ourselves. Mm-hmm. Because AI could be a threat to humanity.
Just to tie, some of this back to the current state of the regulatory environment, right? With securities laws and, should crypto be considered a security? I don't think we've talked about the should very much. And I mean, there are different views on this, but I mean, I'll say this just to throw it out there. I mean, from one perspective, even regardless of where you lie on the political spectrum, I mean, securities laws, it's primarily about disclosure. It's not about telling you whether you should purchase stock in a company or whether you should purchase this loan or this asset. It's just ensuring that if you do want to purchase it, the issuer has disclosed everything that you could possibly want to know about it. And I think there's a debate to be had about whether that's overkill in certain circumstances. I mean, for instance, going public costs millions and millions of dollars, and it's not a realistic goal for most entrepreneurs. So there's a debate there. But again, at the end of the day, it's about disclosure. That's relatively agreeable, right? It's not particularly controversial. That's what I wanted to say. The fact that you should know about something before you make an investment. And I'll admit that can apply to some crypto projects. And perhaps it's not entirely unreasonable to expect that if somebody, it's in particular, if you're not talking about a truly decentralized blockchain network, if you're talking about, I mean, something like Ripple, where there's an organization that really runs it and governs it, and they're selling this thing to you. I mean, again, it's not entirely unreasonable from a fraud prevention standpoint to say that, well, maybe Ripple should make some facts known, right? And that is most likely what is going to happen over the coming months and years, whether it's Congress, whether it's the SEC, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we just want to know what the rules are. Just tell us, what are the rules? What can we do to ensure that we're in compliance? And hopefully we can end this regulatory regime of just regulation by enforcement, right? The SEC suing you. You don't quite know why. You settle. So the rest of us don't learn why.
Right. Binance and BNB, right? They're headquartered in Malta, I believe.
Yeah.
So why was, is it Cheng Xiaoping, CZ? Why was he in trouble for, why did he get in, so this is what confuses me. They're not even an American company. So why would the SEC or any American jurisdiction have control or have the authority to jail him? And then he went along with it.
Yeah, it's a good question. And the reason is quite simply the U.S. government and U.S. regulators do not care whether you're a foreign company. What they care about is whether you do business with Americans. And there were Americans buying up BNB. There were Americans using Binance. Therefore, the SEC claimed jurisdiction, the U.S. government claimed jurisdiction, and that's their position. And
if he didn't turn himself in and go through the court proceedings, they would have put out a extradition to get him to the U.S.
Oh yeah, I would assume so. Yeah, that's right. And there would have been civil SEC penalties. I'm sure. Well, there were, right? But I mean, it would have been potentially worse if he hadn't even showed up. Binance probably could have or would have been shut down to U.S.
So was Binance in trouble because of the exchange or because of BNB?
Well,
it was the exchange part, wasn't it?
I think so. I have not read into the specifics very much, but I do recall reading a few articles for what it's worth. I think it had something to do with money laundering charges, or essentially, failing to comply with know your customer regulations, that kind of thing. Where, and I think the general principle was there are billions and billions of dollars going through Binance, and I mean, if that were a bank, they would have had to collect, everything, essentially your fingerprints, right? Take pictures of your face and your license. And apparently he didn't do that.
Right.
So I think it had something to do with that. And if you've noticed, a lot of exchanges, I think Coinbase, I noticed that Coinbase did this earlier than most. They do have know your customer, compliance procedures. So I suspect it was related to that, and just it didn't comply with Bank Secrecy Act, all kinds of things that other financial institutions.
So they'll get you, even if you're not headquartered here.
Oh yeah. If
you're breaking American laws in that way.
Well, yes, and of course, if you're doing business with Americans.
Yeah, in the volume that they were doing it.
Oh, yes, that just puts you even more on the radar. But but again, if you don't sell anything to Americans, you don't do any business with Americans, and you're not an American company, then you're fine. You're in the clear, in theory. Yeah. So we'll see. Bit of a tangent. You've done a bunch of these podcasts, right? And I'm just impressed because I don't think anyone could be reasonably expected to speak intelligibly for 1 to 2 hours plus on anything. But fortunately, we're talking about blockchain. It's more of an obscure topic. So what do you think about it? I think most would find it challenging to determine whether either of us are saying something brilliant or wildly idiotic.
Well, that's why I like to throw in the occasional. Roe versus Wade, and throw a bomb in there once in a while. Then I know someone who might be listening to this in the background while they're doing dishes or whatever they're doing, folding laundry, and then suddenly I say like Roe versus Wade, and they're like, "What?"
Yep.
Or and we also throw in some subliminal whispers. I didn't tell you about that when I first did this interview.
Oh.
But like in post, I'll go ahead and I'll lay down a track of like whispers with all kinds of obscenities and slurs and people hear it, but they don't hear it, remember Tyler Durden?
Sure.
Putting this little splices of porn in, back when in the good old days when film was film.
Yep.
And you could do that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And
sneaking it in. Yeah.
So I'll throw in a little bit of, should I stop with this before people take me seriously?
well, fortunately we can edit, right?
Yeah. This is not being edited. This is gold.
Yeah,
this is going to stay.
Yeah. All right. Keep it.
This is fun. Like, I wonder if podcasts do that. I don't know. Look, if a podcast did that, no one listened to it, no one would care. Mm-hmm. But if a podcast did that and it was Joe Rogan, he'd have some sort of congressional hearing.
Yes,
right?
Almost certainly.
So, this actually kind of does tie back to so I can say all that and I can get away with it because no one's going to really hear this and I'm not doing it. But let's say I did do it and which is kind of fun to think about. You can throw in all kinds of fun stuff underneath. And because we're a video platform too, we could throw in, how about just confusing things? Like suddenly there's Bert and Ernie for like a tenth of a second. Like why am I thinking of Sesame Street?
I don't know. I like the concept.
How about juxtapose Bert and Ernie with like a dragon with like I don't know, some like scene from the movie Seven. Like juxtapose really weird stuff together. I don't know. Anyways,
just why not? Just see if anyone's paying attention.
All right. The idea of this getting back to crypto is that so much of it's like when they say like they're not going to audit you if you make $3,000 a year, but if you make $300,000, $3 million a year, now suddenly they're gonna want to get you. The case has to be big enough. This is true a lot with the police officer we had in here talking about crypto scams.
Yeah, sure.
Talking about I shouldn't even call them crypto scams. I should edit that out because I hate how they call them that. Because you wouldn't call it $1 scam,
right? Exactly.
If they ended up using USD to rob you, or if they stole my wallet, they just dollar robbed me.
Yeah.
No, they pickpocketed you.
Yeah, it's just a scam.
But anyway, the scammers that use cryptocurrency as the medium, he was saying like, look, if it's not a $2 million, or so if it's not a big number, the FBI is not going to lift a finger. Like they don't have the resources.
Yep.
So it's like they went after Ripple. They didn't go after some tiny one. So much of it is spongy. And I think so when it comes to justice, what's fair, right? Like that'll fly in the face of what we think is fair, what we'll think is logical. Like, oh, healthcare should not be connected to our employer. Yeah, but it is. Yep. And it has been now for 80, 90 years. So what are you going to do? Like you can't unwind the clock.
Well, for sure. But again, fortunately, I think we at least have reason to be hopeful that it will not be spongy soon, right? That maybe...
I think it'll always be spongy. It was just ridiculously ill-defined and even nefariously ill-defined before.
Oh, yes.
Where they would, it was a malicious thing. It was like it was purposefully ill-defined. Or maybe you can talk about that, like just how ridiculous it was. Where, because speaking of injustice, tell me if I'm wrong on this. Mm-hmm. Kraken, the large American exchange, was asked to submit. No, they went to the SEC and said, "What do we need to do to submit? What forms do we need to submit? What licenses do we need to get? Blah 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 blah." And they said, well, you need to do this and this. And Kraken tried, and there was no this and this. Like there was no form. There was no registration portal. Like there was no way for them to do what the SEC was asking them to do. And then the SEC fined them like $40 million or some large number.
Yeah. So listen, I'm not familiar with the specifics of Kraken, but what I can tell you is that lines up with the general state of affairs with the SEC, where if your intention is to become compliant, and say you're an issuer of tokens and you concede these are securities, what do I do? To my knowledge, there's not been a path for you.
Okay.
And again, of course, that's part of the fundamental problem. And again, more than anything, we can debate the pros and cons of what the rules should be. That's an important discussion. But for now, for better or worse, just telling us what the rules are would be a huge win.
Yeah, that seems to be, I hear that a lot.
Yeah. Almost no matter what they are.
We just want to know. I actually heard that too when I was down in Honduras, where they have this startup society. There's a lot of biotech. And it's similar. They said the same thing, and I was surprised to hear that, but maybe I shouldn't have been. Yeah. Where when it comes to this one company I talked to, they do implantable chips. And they said there's just no rules around it. And so companies like Medtronic or something, now they'll do it for medicinal, I don't know if rehabilitative purposes. That's the term. Mm-hmm. So like if it helps you to whatever, get back to, normal health, then it's fine. Like we have pacemakers and that, that kind of thing. But if say, I just want to put a chip in my hand because I want to, in the case of this one guy, he waved his hand over my phone and the NFC chip in his hand had his website pop up on my phone. Huh. Now, maybe you could do that to yourself, but what if we want to start a business where we put that in people's hands? He said it was more of a lack of regulation in that field than it was an explicit, no, you can't do this.
Yeah.
But it was effectively the same thing because we need some, and I hear that in crypto, like you said, we've heard that in crypto a lot.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I think this comes back to, in particular for crypto, the fact that there's been this perception, I think, I've gotten the impression that there's been this large perception that crypto has been and is unregulated. And again, I hope that's clear that that's false, right? It's not unregulated. It's heavily regulated. We just don't know what the rules are, which is the worst possible scenario to be in.
What, regulation by judicial ruling?
Well, yeah, regulation by enforcement. Again, the SEC says we have jurisdiction. The CFTC says they have jurisdiction. Congress does nothing. The executive branch, until recently, I suppose, to be fair, has been silent. And we have this scenario where there are existing rules and laws that arguably could apply, but it's just unclear how they do. And that's different from a scenario where there are no laws, right? And it truly is unregulated, at least from the perspective of the federal and state governments. Frankly, if that were the case, I think the crypto industry probably would have developed a lot more quickly than it did, because because then the risk of running afoul of existing regulations would be non-existent, right? So I think it's this middle ground, that this gray area it has caused a lot of problems. And again, I mean, it's just good to see that this might be solved soon.
What would you like to see?
Yeah, well, again, more than anything, just tell us in terms that are clearer than the Howey test, which, the Supreme Court case from decades and decades and decades ago. I mean, just give us a better definition of when a token should be considered a security, and tell us if it's not a security and it doesn't have to follow exactly the same process as issuing a stock or a bond. What else do we have to do? I mean, what's the deal?
But
right?
Do you think this space moves? Do you think the government can catch up?
Well, it's been 15 years, right? Or so. So it's not like it's been yesterday. I think it's time they did.
Okay.
Can they? We'll see. And again, I think we're probably still pretty far away from it. But wasn't there an executive order in January simply ordering the SEC to write some kind of rules for the space? I think they gave them 6 months. So in theory,
who's going to write the rules?
The SEC, just the regulators.
But who are they?
Well, unelected bureaucrats.
But how do they find experts to know this stuff well enough to write the rules? Shouldn't they bring in a builder to help them, like to consult with them, or is that full of moral hazards?
No, I mean, I think that happens. I think that's part of their process, for better or worse, right? I think some critics...
Then you have free market people worried about corporatocracy.
Right.
Where it's like...
Or the incumbents.
I'll make the rules.
Yeah.
And then you build a moat that keeps out the competitors.
Yep. There's a risk about that. And I mean, for instance, I would not be shocked if Coinbase, for example, is just the exchange.
Hester Pierce?
In the U.S. Huh.
Is that her name, Hester Pierce? It's a good name.
Yeah.
Sounds like a fiction character.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Well.
But yeah, like Coinbase.
Yeah. Coinbase. I mean, again, I think that's right. They've,
She's the CFTC or the SEC?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Just new, right? Yeah. I mean, Gary Gensler's, out.
Yeah.
So that'll make a difference. And again, we'll just have to see. I think the SEC can't necessarily solve this alone. I mean, they could. They can make a lot of progress. They could clarify at a bare minimum when is a token an investment contract. They could do that. They could do that, yesterday. They could do it, tomorrow. But at the same time, I mean, I think we need a little bit more than that. I mean, stable coins, right? Just what needs to happen there. And again, for a lot of these tokens that are designed for decentralized networks and systems, smart contracts, that sort of thing. I mean, at least knowing that, knowing that they're not going to get arbitrarily sued by some regulatory agency simply because there's a potential argument that they may have run afoul of regulations would be nice. I mean, again, it comes down to clarity at the end of the day.
I just wonder how useful it'll be because, I mean, is a new Ethereum going to be created?
Well, it's possible.
I mean, are there going to be a new wave of cryptos, or did these already get? Maybe I'm thinking pretty limited here.
Well, I don't know. I mean, let's think of broad strokes. So again, 15 years in, right? And let's just compare to the internet, just because it's analogous in some ways. I believe it took 10 to 15 years for the internet to be sufficiently adopted in the United States. I think it took up to 30 years, if I'm not mistaken, to be adopted worldwide. I would not be surprised to see a similar adoption curve for blockchain, which would mean that we're getting there. Maybe a little slower, though, because the regulatory challenges really threw things for a loop. So, I mean, I think we'll have to see. Right? I mean, there were, thousands, right, of different tokens out there. Most of them are not going to exist, in my opinion, in a number of years.
No, I guess we see a lot of new meme coins.
Sure.
Yeah, so if they offer regulation around that, it might clear it up. But
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, we'll see.
I don't know how much. Okay,
right.
Like the big cryptos have already come out. It's like, again, that's probably limited thinking and thinking that there won't be a new Solana or a new large platform that'll come out down the road that will be benefited by clearer regulation.
Yeah, it's at least possible, right? And I think there are network effects that play into these various tokens, right? And so perhaps to your point, Ethereum's been around for a long time. There are a lot of people invested in Ethereum, and the value of Ethereum grows potentially exponentially the larger the network is. And the larger the network is, perhaps the more difficult it is to replicate. So I think a lot of that is correct, but it's not impossible, in my opinion, to see new.
And it's more than just creating a cryptocurrency and a cryptocurrency blockchain platform. It's also about accepting cryptocurrency or custodying cryptocurrency. Yeah. There are other aspects to it than just ICO and accepting people's money for starting a crypto project. It's also about these other ways that you interact with it. Right.
Infrastructure.
And is that what is more of the impediment to your clients' interest in the topic?
Well, particularly, it has been the securities issue, to be honest, but that's because I'm a securities attorney, right? That's what I see. And also money transmission laws have been an issue in certain circumstances, but it really has come down to securities, right? I mean, are they going to get in trouble with the SEC? And again, hopefully we'll see some changes in that here shortly. Again, to your point about infrastructure, right? And just what might we see coming out of clearer regulations, right? Clearer laws. I think the investment just continues to spike, right? I think there are institutional, for instance, players. They've started to come into the space and enter the space now that it's becoming a little bit more popular. But if you can de-risk the legal side of the equation even more, I think that you'll just see billions of dollars in additional capital flowing in, and perhaps finally we can see some utility out of these blockchains that in theory could have happened years ago, but it just takes time to tokenize assets, right? Put stocks on the blockchain, put other securities on the blockchain, put real estate on the blockchain.
There's so much there to regulate.
Yeah.
Like to come up with definitions of all of these applications. It sounds like a ton of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And it'll take time. But I mean, I think most could agree that at the end of the day, I mean, making this more efficient, it should be a win-win for everybody. But I understand there's some resistance from, legacy players, but still, at the end of the day, it's a technology, right? Technology increases productivity. I think that's entirely true of this particular piece of technology. And I think we should embrace it. And, you want rules, regulations, laws, fine, pass them, but be reasonable about it. Don't get in the way. And again, I think we'd all be better for it. I suppose I don't have to convince you of that.
Well, I do wonder about the capacity, we mentioned a little bit earlier, like the FBI just doesn't have enough resources to go after every little scam that someone sends money to a foreign country after being scammed by that entity.
Yep.
Similarly, I think of the volume of rules and exceptions and stipulations and how do you shape a playing field for every aspect of crypto? It just sounds like too much, but maybe not. Maybe if you have, enough people on Capitol Hill just doing their job and doing it every day or whatever, and everyone doing their part, that we could have a well-formed playing field so that the game, quote, the game is enjoyable and fair and all that. But there's so many aspects, whether it's a meme coin, whether it's an NFT, whether it's tokenizing real world assets, whether it's smart contracts, whether it's money, right? Bitcoin as money, or whether these are all commodities, or the ICO. There are so many aspects, and there continue to be more. What if I don't use the crypto to buy something, but my AI does? With AI agents now kind of on the horizon, if not already here. So I wonder in the big picture about the government's ability to even keep up. And if it can't, then what?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting thought. And of course, I think we've seen.
But we're not there, you're saying. Like that's a little science fiction-y. That's like 100 years. That's a little bit that's not a accurate assessment of where we're at now. We can make these regulations and we should.
Yeah.
That's where you're coming
exactly.
from. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, okay. I think there are achievable goals in the short term that could be reached and existing problems that could be solved or at least mitigated in the short run. And then again, I mean, of course, we'll have to go from there. And you're absolutely right. Policy seems to always take a very long time to catch up with new technology. Just seems to be the way it is.
I mean, that's been that case since making LSD illegal.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's only accelerating. So again, I'm putting the cart before the horse, but I don't think you have to look very far in the future. If you look at it as a hockey stick, exponential increase in tech, that it's just, it's not going to keep up. And so how do you make laws or try to keep things contained in the container that is our government?
Well, I mean, one way of looking at it, talking about fraud, right? Going after fraud, preventing fraud. I mean, it's true. There's the FBI, there's the SEC, there are these regulatory agencies, and yes, they do investigate. They do go after these types of cases. But I mean, to your point, there's a large percentage of cases of fraud that just are never on the radar, and probably even more that they just don't enforce, don't go after. I think just from a practical perspective, it's necessary to have other mechanisms for sniffing out and avoiding and preventing fraud outside of simply the regulatory agency, right? Whether it has something to do with the due diligence process, auditors, other companies that provide services. I mean, so I think that has to be part of the picture, especially in connection with new technology. I mean, at the end of the day, if there's a problem, an entrepreneur, could potentially solve it. And I think that's what ends up filling in a lot of the gaps along the way. I mean, ideally. But we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I'm struck by the difference between, it's wrong to steal, right? It's illegal to steal.
Yep.
And, there's a need for updating the law book or the law enforcement investigative side of things when new technology comes about, because now it's like, officer, someone robbed me. Okay, what did they take? Show me. I can't show you. It was a file on my computer. Yeah. What do you mean? You like a file? No. It's just a file. Like you can't hold it. It's on my. Well, how'd they steal it? They break in. Well, not through my front door, but they hacked into my computer. You mean they got into your, so like you have to update our understanding of just enforcing current rules around theft.
Well, that's right.
And so now, of course, there's crypto theft and they're working just to keep up with that. But the regulation side is very different than criminal law.
Yeah.
I mean, that's you though, right? Like that's what you do as an attorney. You do regulation. Enforcement or you help companies navigate the regulations.
Yep, at least on the security side.
Yeah.
Right.
Less so about we need to make people whole who've been wronged.
Right. Nothing to do with litigation or any criminal law. Yeah, not personally anyway. Yeah.
The whole regulation side of things is just, I don't know. I've always come at it from a pretty libertarian, and so to recognize the need for regulation, I mean that almost sounds like an oxymoron. The need for regulation. It's like, but I think I've wised up in the last 20 years since I was in college to recognize that a Wild West isn't what we want either.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it this way. I think you put it well earlier. I mean, there's one thing. It's one thing to think about what would be ideal, and another to look at what's the current reality, right? And just from a pragmatic perspective, I think that's where a lot of people can get there on viewing new legislation and new rules and regulations as at least incrementally a good thing for the space, right? Even if one believes that in a perfect world, really government would be decentralized, right? Similar to a blockchain is. But again, I think at the end of the day, what the pragmatic view is, all right, what does the world look like today? Well, there are federal regulatory agencies, and they're a big part of the everyday lives of anyone participating in any particular industry. And there are existing rules that don't work. Let's fix them.
And because we are in a world where regulation is a part of our life, we want them.
Yeah.
We want them, I guess. I guess comparing it like the analogy I made earlier about rules in a football game. Like if there was no out of bounds, there'd be no game.
Yeah.
Right? So they make rules. And maybe maybe the line I draw is, okay, there should be an out of bounds, or we can't even agree on where the goal is.
Yeah.
Right? We need an out of bounds. But do we have to regulate what pass interference is? Do we have to regulate what holding is?
All right. Perhaps to your point, things like fraud, theft, murder has always been illegal.
Yeah.
Regulations goes further than that.
Yeah. That's why I put it over here, and I put the fraud and the assault over here.
Yep.
You have to update those, like I said, because now there's new ways to steal from people. But the whole idea of building the rules for the game, that's a whole other area of law that, again, I guess it's, I concede you need an out of bounds. Like you need rules, but then you'll hear rules in football, like ineligible man downfield. And I'm like, what the hell what does that even mean? Like that was a great play. Why should that team be penalized because an offensive lineman was 5 yards down the field instead of 4? Yeah. I mean, are you serious? Like that's just
is what it is.
Yeah. Like I guess you need that. And I guess if you didn't have it, the game would be different and less enjoyable. Same with offsides in hockey.
Sure.
Like if you didn't have it, one guy would just stay parked down there the whole time and it would be ridiculous.
Yep.
And I don't want ridiculous. So I guess we don't want ridiculous in any number of areas of life.
No.
Finance or whatever.
And I mean, I think there's a legitimate debate that could be had, but I think for practical reasons, it's essentially irrelevant in today's.
It's just so hard.
You're talking about, you need to know where the out of bounds lines are. I think just to use that analogy to describe what we have today, we have a scenario where there are lines, but you can't see them.
Yeah.
And again, probably the worst possible scenario where you're playing a game and you might step out of bounds, but you don't know when you might or how or why you did, if you did. Yeah. So again, I think that just needs to change. But just briefly, you mentioned insider trading. I think just a little fact. I recall that I believe it's a Minneapolis-based law firm. There was an attorney at a Minneapolis-based law firm that was involved in essentially a seminal case in insider trading.
Oh,
I can't remember the decade. I think it was a few decades ago. I want to say, I think it was a Dorsey and Whitney attorney.
Okay.
And it's in the textbook, in the law school textbook.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't remember all the details, but just enough that, I mean, it is too bad to be this guy because he essentially, again, made case law. So from his perspective, it wasn't necessarily illegal or clearly illegal.
Okay.
And then it just became illegal after he did it. And
it's like
that's
having
why
a disease named after you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, rough. And I mean, I think it had something to do with the first types of insider trading laws had to do with breach of confidentiality. All right. That's really what it was about. It was about, all right, if you're an officer or director of a company and you trade on information that the general public doesn't have, and that's confidential information, an upcoming M&A transaction, say. Well, there's one way of looking at that. By you trading on that and potentially moving the price, you're conveying something to the world. And you're not exactly saying specifically that there's an M&A deal, but sure, you're telling people, you're telling the world information.
Yeah, how does that work? Like, let's say I don't know the rules, but I'm guessing you're not allowed to invest in the companies that you. Well, how would you divest from them?
Well,
see, this is where my skepticism of even trying to regulate this stuff. Not that we shouldn't, but it's like.
That's a challenge.
It's getting way too complicated for a governing body, at least the ones that I'm aware of, and the traditional ones that try to like wrap its arms around and contain and nurture and this kind of thing. So let's say you're an M&A attorney and you know this company is probably going to get bought out by a large company like Unilever or Kellogg or General Mills or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, wow, their stock's going to pop. Or because General Mills is going to buy this company, their stock's going to pop. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, I'm going to buy some General Mills. Well, that feels a little slimy. Okay.
Well, yeah.
But then so the rule might be, okay, you're not allowed to buy General Mills. Okay, can I have General Mills? No. Yeah, but I have a mutual fund that has General Mills. I can't do anything about that.
Well, that's probably fine.
Right? Yeah, but it just gets so delineated.
No, it is. And again, I mean, insider trading laws, they've expanded since that poor Dorsey and Whitney attorney got caught up in the.
Do you know the guy?
Law. No,
okay.
No,
it just seems like you've got some connection there. I don't know.
I just remember that from reading out of the law school textbook.
I just think you're throwing Dorsey and Whitney's name out there because you're with Frederickson.
Plugging them. Any PR is good, right?
That's true.
So anyway, I mean, I think
they're badass now.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Infamous, but for what it's worth, personally, I find the classic framework of insider trading to be a little bit more logically consistent. Again, do you have a duty to the company? Are you breaching some kind of fiduciary arrangement? And in that case, I mean, I think,
I think we know in our hearts where the rules are. Like I said, it feels kind of slimy if that M&A attorney suddenly buys a bunch of General Mills knowing that he's going to help. Because it's sort of like betting on your team.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of like betting in baseball when you're involved in the game.
Conflict of interest, but there's also a breach of ethical obligations, frankly, in that scenario.
But to come up with all those and to put rules around them all from one federal government, again, it just sounds way too much. And now you're supposed to come up with insider trading rules. Again, that's just one tiny sliver of all of crypto.
Yeah.
Around crypto, like you're going to come up with insider trading rules on crypto. Like, oh, if you're, who knows what.
I mean, in theory, you should be able to take existing insider trading concepts and just apply it, right? In theory, you should be able to do that with respect to a lot of the aspects of crypto. It just so happens that the securities regulatory issue is particularly convoluted, and that needs to be fixed.
But it doesn't repeat, it rhymes. Like crypto doesn't just introduce a new security, it introduces a new kind of security.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's a new category. So you can't just copy and paste the same regulations. Maybe you can for some, the same ideas.
For some, right? I mean, here's an example. Say you sell a share of stock. It just happens to be on the blockchain.
Right.
No reason that should be any different.
Sure.
Right. Mining and staking.
Yeah.
How should that be taxed? And yes, as of today, the IRS says that's income.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
Mine, stake.
Right.
But again, I think at the St. Thomas Law School, we talked about this a little bit, but I think it's an interesting case, right? If you're interested in getting into it, where there was a family that made an argument on their tax returns that staking is not, that does not generate taxable income because we're creating new property, right?
Yeah.
We're building a new chair. Right?
Yeah.
We're baking a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
It happened to be Tezos, so I think they actually use the term baking, right? And there's some logic to that, right? If you really dig into what's happening right on the blockchain. Well, staking, all right. So
staking's a great example.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's another use case. It's another application that is completely novel.
Yeah.
So the existing laws won't work.
Yeah.
Or at least it's not, though they're trying to make them work, but even though it doesn't quite fit.
At least you can argue about it.
Yeah.
Right. And for what it's worth, the IRS in that case did concede, fine, you can have a refund, but they did it in such a way that it's not precedential, right? So they just wanted the issue to go away. And it did. It did for now. But I think that argument could be made again. I mean,
I got a 1099 from Coinbase because
For staking.
Yeah. Staking my USDC on there. And like I get a sliver of, I can't remember what other tokens that you can stake.
Yep. Well, now the USDC, to be fair, that's got to be some kind of a lending scenario, right? Where you get interest.
That's true. Right? So let's just isolate like the Tezos.
Yeah.
Or whatever else you can stake on Coinbase.
Right. Yeah. Where you're actually creating, you're assisting with creating new tokens.
So if you've got a ton of Ethereum and you're staking it and you're getting Ethereum from that, you're supposed to report that as income.
Correct.
Right.
Right. You're supposed to. And then should you, yes.
Okay. Well, we did a lot of talking about the principle or the idea of regulation and in a very broad way, which is my preferred way of looking at it. Like, I don't know how in 100 years it's all going to be able to be kept up with, or even in 20 in another generation. But as of today, so let's live in the now.
Yeah.
We hope for some markers of where the bounds are.
Right.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, absolutely. And again, I mean, if you look at the implications, we touched on this a little bit, but the implications of classifying something like Ethereum as a security are profound, right? I mean, you have to. So one of the primary benefits of blockchain and tokens on the blockchain is that you get rid of middlemen, right? I mean, I can send something directly to you, in a trustless manner. You don't need a central, authoritative figure that maintains the ledger. That's the whole point. Now, if instead, say Ethereum were considered a security, well, any transfer has to go through a broker-dealer. That's just the way it is.
Right. Yeah. Some of those regulations that they were proposing, like where any miner was considered a custodian. I think that was it, or every wallet. I can't remember what it was, but it was just was
DeFi, I think.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and they can't.
They can't. Right?
Yeah,
who's going to comply?
Yeah, that's a good example of a square peg round hole.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas it's the square peg is the old regulations that they're trying to put on, and it just doesn't fit.
Yeah, I mean there is no bank.
There's no compatibility anymore. Yeah, I see that all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, fortunately, after 15 years, some people are starting to catch up and get acquainted with the space.
Yeah. And with this administration ostensibly being pro crypto, I guess it's time to kind of make hay while the sun is shining for the industry.
Right.
So
agreed. And again, it's not going to be perfect, of course not.
Right.
There are going to be problems, but like we've been saying, anything's better than nothing at this point. At least on the securities.
Well, one thing we don't have to worry about is a meme coin. Is a crackdown on meme coins when the president himself puts out one. Oh
my goodness. Yeah. That's an interesting state of affairs, isn't it?
Meme coins off limits. Yeah. You're free. Yep. Bonk. Yes. Dog with hat, fart coin, you're free. Yep. Right. Just go for it. Silly, and that is Wild West. You can just do whatever you want there, I guess. Well, see, and this is where I have spoken with some groups that are creating NFTs, right? And it's frustrating, but I think there's a pretty good argument that NFTs are not securities, right? And you can make them, but there's an argument that they could be. I mean, and again, Trump came out with NFTs. Right. Trump did. And well, what do you think, right? Like, look at an NFT. And is there investment of money? Yeah, sure. Right. People buy NFTs and you're right. That's a whole other new novel application of the idea. Yeah. Yep. And again, is there an expectation of profits? Yeah, there can be. Is it based on the efforts of others? Well, if you think about, it depends. You have to, this is tricky because then you have to almost get into the heart of the buyer. Yeah. Because some are just investors. They buy up half a dozen. Yep. And some love the art. Right. Right. Is a piece of art a security? No. Okay. And that's the thing. That's why I think the better argument is that NFTs are not securities. If I buy a Van Gogh and I spend $12 million, that's not a security. No. And but it's interesting. But it's an investment. Okay. The difference there is that you're buying the whole thing. I'm buying a house. Is it an investment? Well, sure. Mm-hmm. I want real estate to go up and make money, but it's not a piece of an enterprise. Yeah, that's right. Whereas NFTs are. So there's a difference there, but okay. And they can be. Got it. But I think personally, where I think a legitimate
debate could be had is on the efforts of others test. So for instance, even a painting, if you kind of think about it, well,
if you buy a print.
Yep. If you buy a print, but then if the artist is still alive, there are things the artist could be doing to try to increase the value of anything that artist has created. Is that efforts of others? I mean, again, the answer has been typically no.
So spongy.
But it's gray. I just wanted to highlight the fact that you can make these arguments, and this is what the industry has been dealing with for the past, again, 15 years.
Well, I was hoping we'd end this conversation on a nice bow, tie it up in a nice, neat bow. And then you brought up NFTs as securities, and that just sort of but you know what? That's the state of that's kind of the state of things right now. And
exactly,
I that kind of gets me. That's kind of what I nerd out on, though, is that I like those thought experiments. Like, how do you apply those rules to this application? To this new technology, this new, I would say, societal activity.
Right.
The whole NFT world, or Bitcoin mining and staking. Is that income? Yeah, it's.
Yep.
Old systems are incompatible with new. That's the kind of the big thing that I see all over. But
right. Well, if we're getting near to the end, so what's Bitcoin going to look like for the rest of the year? What's it going to be?
To me, it's always like the beach ball that's being kept underwater. Yep. I mean, it's got such buoyancy.
Yep.
I don't know if it's going to moon, but it could.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's going to crash to 50 anymore.
Yeah.
I just don't see how they can keep it, how it can stay down for long. I think it's I think the days are gone where we see a quadruple within a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still gonna just, I think, keep on creeping up, and in some cases jump up.
Mm-hmm.
A 20% day, at some point, just huge red candle. Yeah, I know. And then long, you said rest of the year. So that's my rest of the year kind of short term.
Do we see another, 60 to 80% drawdown like we have every single cycle next year, or 2027?
No, I don't know if we even saw one last time, did we?
I don't know.
Maybe 60 to 80, maybe 60.
Yeah.
Because it hit
65 to 16.
It hit
right?
60. Yeah. What's that? Is that 3/4?
It's close.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the ETF does.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see.
It just feels like things, because even if you look at the logarithmic chart that they always like to show, it shows a leveling off. And yeah, it does continue to rise. And it just a little bit is a lot in those logarithm charts. You don't have to go up much for it to be 100,000.
Right.
But it's still relatively level and but continuing to go up. So
yeah,
I don't think it'll be as dramatic.
Yeah, we'll see. And again, just curious. I mean, it's fun to watch. I think it's important.
It's all unprecedented.
It is. It's all unprecedented. And again, I think
it just broke from tech stocks the last couple of days.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
where the tech stocks sank and then the Bitcoin went up, and it's like,
yep,
that's new.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the correlation has come and gone. It depends. And I mean, it's its own thing at the end of the day, right? It's its own thing. I think just very briefly, I think it's interesting where, a lot of folks look at Bitcoin and they say, how could this possibly be worth anything? It's intangible.
Mm-hmm.
What am I supposed to do with this? And just one thing that I like to think about or point to is, well, if you think about gold, right? Sure, it has some other utility other than as money,
mm-hmm.
right? You just using manufacturing, jewelry, whatever. But at the same time, I think if you analyze the price, right, it's what, $3,400 an ounce
mm-hmm.
right now. Well, okay, $34 an ounce. I suspect that about this much, right, just a small portion, whatever it is, 20 to 25 to even up to 50% of the price can probably be explained by utility.
Yeah, very little.
But there's a bonus, right? And what's that all about? What's that about? Well, it's the simple fact that happens to be historically an asset that a lot of different people, it's popular. People have flocked to, knowing that someone is more likely to want this gold than
mm-hmm.
my shoe or whatever it is, right? And I think you can think about it that way with something like Bitcoin. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
That's all it takes. Bitcoin doesn't have to, have any other function. It doesn't
mm-hmm.
have to, is all I'm saying. And again, I think that's tough for a lot of people to
It's the
grasp.
21st century store of value.
Yeah. Yeah. And why not? I mean, why couldn't it be?
Why not? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
Probably to the people watching this, but maybe not. Maybe you'll make a few of them a believer and recognize that, most of the gold is just speculation and popularity and the belief that it's a store of value.
Yeah. Value is fundamentally subjective. It's all at the end of the day.
Yeah. The one author from Israel that people don't like anymore, but they used to love him. I forget it. He wrote Sapiens.
I don't think I'm familiar, or maybe I am. I don't know.
Oh, I forgot his name. Anyway, I read part of Sapiens, and then I just didn't think it was all that great. But he talked about fictions. Mm-hmm. Like the fiction that he uses that word loosely, but it's the idea that we all believe something, so we act a certain way because of that shared belief. And it's like if the president gets shot, we're going to act in a certain way, right? And if he passes, we'll act in a certain way, like it's a huge deal. It's important, we need to get a new president. And then whatever actually a better example is Trump issues an executive order. And for the most part, people care because they're going to follow it, even if they don't want to. Like, why do they all agree to do it? Right?
Yep.
Because that's what we do.
Yeah.
It's a shared belief. It's a fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So fiction can be viewed as like some sort of derogatory thing, but he doesn't use it derogatorily. He's just simply saying it's a shared belief that's made up.
Well, there is an implicit threat behind it too, though, isn't there? At the end of the day, that, if you violate this, there will be consequences.
That's true. So maybe even a better example is one where there is no. But the threat is only because it's a shared belief too. Like the officers do it because it's their duty.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And now they're paid, but that's because, it's all bound. It's all a shared belief system, a shared behavioral system. And so, you're just going to apply that to store of value. Mm-hmm. Just shared belief that gold, just shared belief that the Mona Lisa is priceless. It's a shared belief that, any collectible is worth what it is.
Right.
Anyway.
And for what it's worth, very early on, the reason why I'm not a billionaire, right? Why I did not buy or mine Bitcoin early on, at the point where it was trading for fractions of a cent, I found the concept highly compelling early on, but my primary reservation was that the concept of Bitcoin itself is infinitely reproducible at relatively low cost, right? And now there are thousands of tokens, but still, it's been 15 years. For whatever reason or reasons, it's pretty clear Bitcoin's just one, right?
It's the 0 to 1. Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't have to be that way.
Right.
Right. It didn't have to.
Yeah. Litecoin always said we're the silver to Bitcoin's gold, but it doesn't seem to manifest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think there's some kind of critical mass, and it seems more likely to keep growing than not.
Yeah. Yeah. I still advocate people invest in it.
Yeah. Yeah. At least a percentage.
Yep.
Small amount, if nothing. Yeah.
Well, thanks, man.
Yeah, sure thing.
This was
Thanks
good.
for having me.
We didn't have anyone here talking about this stuff, and I think we did it in a way that was pretty interesting and I think palatable for people, even though it's a kind of in the weeds topic. So thanks for coming by.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.